The lobby of the Callaway Grand smelled of fresh lilies and money. A man in a plain gray shirt walked in, carrying a canvas bag, his 6-year-old daughter clutching a worn rabbit plush against her chest. Her eyes traveled across the gold trim, the chandeliers, the city skyline beyond the glass. A woman in a tailored blazer crossed the floor toward them. She looked at the canvas bag. She looked at the little girl. Then, without raising her voice, she told security to escort them out. The little girl tightened her grip on her father's hand. He did not argue. He knelt down to her eye level, whispered something into her ear that made her nod, then stood and met the manager's eyes. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I will be back." By morning she would understand exactly what he meant, and by then it would already be too late. The Callaway Grand rose 38 stories above Fifth Avenue, a tower of glass and steel that caught the morning light and threw it back at the city in long, gleaming sheets. Black SUVs idled along the curb in a patient line. Doormen in charcoal coats moved like clockwork opening doors before a guest could reach for the handle. Inside, the air carried the faint, expensive sweetness of fresh lilies, arranged in tall crystal vases, and beneath that, the cleaner, sharper note of perfume worn by women who never carried their own bags. It was the kind of place that announced itself before anyone spoke. Grant Callaway walked through the revolving door at 11:30 that morning, with no announcement at all. He wore a soft gray shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of leather sneakers that had seen real walking. Over one shoulder hung a canvas bag, the kind a father packs when he is in charge of snacks, wet wipes, crayons, and a small girl's emergency reserves of patience. He had not slept well. He almost never didn't anymore. The small girl walking beside him was the reason he was there. Sadie was 6. She wore a pale yellow dress that her aunt had picked out white sneakers with sparkles on the toes and a stubborn cowlick at the back of her head that no comb on earth had ever convinced to lie flat. Tucked under her arm was a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Beans, whose left ear had been mended twice, and whose fur had taken on the gray softness of something deeply loved. Her free hand was wrapped around 3 of her father's fingers, the way she always held him when she was somewhere new. It was her mother's birthday. Or it would have been. 3 years had passed since Lillian Callaway had gone to bed one ordinary Tuesday and not woken up. 3 years of Grant learning how to braid hair, how to pack a lunch with the crust cut off, how to be the only voice that answered when a small voice called out in the dark. Every year on this day, he took Sadie somewhere beautiful, and he told her a story about her mother. Lillian had waited tables at a corner bistro in Brooklyn when he first met her, long before any of this glass and lily-scented marble belonged to him. She had once told him halfway through a long night shift that the truest measure of a person was how they treated someone who could give them nothing in return. He had been 26 and broke, and he had never forgotten it. The Callaway Grand had been her favorite of the buildings he eventually owned. She had walked through this lobby on his arm in flat sandals and a sundress, and she had laughed because the man at the door had not recognized either of them and had asked very politely whether they had a reservation. That memory was the reason Grant did not announce himself today. Across the lobby, a woman in a tailored navy blazer stood near the entrance to the hotel's flagship restaurant, the Aurelian Room. Her name tag read, Claire Bennett, floor manager, in small silver letters. She had stood in that same spot more or less for 9 years. She knew the regulars by name and by drink. She knew which couples were married to each other and which were not. She had a habit by now almost involuntary of running her eyes over every guest the moment they crossed her threshold, the way an old jeweler might glance at a stone and know in 2 seconds whether it was worth setting. Her eyes found Grant. They found the canvas bag. They found the little girl with the rabbit. Something in her expression cooled by half a degree. Behind the front desk, a younger woman in a matching blazer was answering a phone, smiling at a guest, writing a name on a notepad all at once. Her name was Wren Mitchell, and she had been working at the Callaway Grand for 5 months. She did not yet know that this morning would change the shape of her life. Sadie wanted the table by the window. She had spotted it from the lobby through the arched doorway, and when Grant asked her where she wanted to sit, she pointed at it without hesitation. From there, she said she could see all the way to the river. The hostess stand was empty when they walked in. Grant nodded toward the corner, and they crossed the floor on their own the way a family might, in a place that did not feel formal enough to require an escort. Grant pulled out the chair for his daughter. She climbed up onto it, placed Mr. Beans carefully on the white tablecloth, where the rabbit could also see, and unzipped the small pouch of crayons she always kept in her father's canvas bag. For the next 12 minutes, nothing happened. The couple at the table 2 over had their water poured twice. A waiter passed within an arm's length of Sadie's chair on 3 separate trips and did not look down. Sadie did not notice. She was busy drawing a sun on the paper napkin, with the yellow crayon, the rays uneven, the smile inside the circle a little crooked because she had not quite mastered crooked smiles yet. She hummed while she worked. Grant watched her and said nothing. Claire Bennett appeared at their table at the 13th minute. She did not bring water. She did not bring menus. Her hands were clasped lightly in front of her blazer, and her eyes traveled from the canvas bag on the floor to the soft gray shirt with no logo, to the small girl drawing on the napkin, and she did not bother to make her assessment subtle. "Sir," she said. "Do you have a reservation with us this morning?" Grant looked up with the calm of a man who had been spoken to in that exact tone many times in his life, and had long since stopped letting it land. "We do not." "Are you a registered guest of the hotel?" "We are not." Her mouth tightened by 1/4 of an inch. "Unfortunately, the Aurelian room is reserved for guests and reservation holders only. I am going to have to ask you to leave. There is no sign at the entrance stating that. It is hotel policy. It is not the policy posted at the door. We walked in. No one stopped us. My daughter ordered orange juice 3 minutes ago from a waiter who did not write it down." Claire's eyes flickered briefly toward the small girl with the crayon. Sadie had stopped humming. She was watching the conversation now with the careful listening attention of a child who could feel that something in the air had changed and could not name what. Claire turned her head and raised one hand toward the bell stand at the far end of the room. "Security," she said to the man who came over. "Please escort these 2 out." She turned to leave. Just as she did, a small phrase escaped her under her breath, not meant for any of them, not meant for anyone, really. "At least today there is someone I get to decide about." Sadie looked up at her father. Her eyes were wide and uncertain. The yellow sun on the napkin was almost finished. Grant knelt down beside her chair so that his face was level with hers. He put one hand gently on her shoulder. He spoke close to her ear so that no one else in the room could hear. She listened. She nodded once, very seriously. He stood. He picked up Mr. Beans. He took her hand. And then, for the first time since the conversation had begun, he looked directly at Claire Bennett, who had not yet quite reached the kitchen doors. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "I will be back." He did not wait for her to answer. He walked his daughter out of the Aurelian room without looking back. The lobby was bright after the soft light of the restaurant. Wren saw them coming before they reached the front desk. She had heard distantly the change in the room next door, the way a quiet room changes when one voice asks a question that does not belong. She had not been close enough to hear the words. She did not need to. She came out from behind the desk without thinking. "Sir, I'm so sorry." Grant stopped. Sadie stopped beside him, holding her father's hand with one fist and Mr. Beans with the other. Wren opened her mouth to say something else, something larger, the kind of sentence that begins with, "That was not right," and then her eyes flickered just for a second, back through the arched doorway of the Aurelian room, where Claire Bennett was now standing very still by the kitchen entrance and looking straight at her. The sentence died in Wren's throat. What she said instead was, "I am so sorry that happened. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough. Sadie looked up at her with a small frown of genuine confusion. "Why didn't they let us sit?" she asked. "We were being good." Wren opened her mouth. No answer came out. 25 years on this earth, 4 years of college, 5 months at this front desk, and she did not have a single word in her that was equal to the question a 6-year-old had just asked her. Grant watched her work through it. He did not help her. He waited. "What is your name?" he asked, when it became clear she could not find an answer. "Wren," she said. "Wren Mitchell." He nodded once, the small nod of a man committing a name to memory. "Thank you, Wren." He took his daughter's hand again, and the two of them began to walk toward the revolving door. Sadie went 4 steps, and then stopped. She looked at the napkin in her free hand, the one with the yellow sun on it. She turned around and walked back to Wren by herself, and she held the napkin up. "This is for you," she said, "so you won't be sad." Wren took it without speaking. The wax of the crayon was still slightly warm. Sadie nodded, the way grown-ups nodded when they had finished delivering an important message, returned to her father, and slipped her hand back into his. Wren stood on the marble floor of the lobby, with a paper napkin in her hand, and watched them go through the revolving door into the row of yellow taxis along 5th Avenue and out into the city. She stood there a long time after the door had stopped turning. She did not know yet what she would do with the question the small girl had asked her. She only knew with a quiet certainty she could not have named 10 minutes earlier that she would have to do something. That night, after the doors of the Callaway Grand had closed behind a man in a gray shirt and a little girl with a stuffed rabbit, Wren Mitchell walked home along 5th Avenue with her hands deep in her coat pockets and a folded paper napkin pressed flat against her ribs. She had run after them. She had reached the curb just as the small girl turned around, and the small girl had handed her the napkin without ceremony. A bright yellow sun drawn in wax crayon, with rays like uneven eyelashes. "For when you're sad," the little girl had said. Wren had wanted to say more. She had wanted to march back inside and tell Claire Bennett that what she had just done was wrong, that there were no rules about canvas bags, that a child had asked a question, and no answer she could think of would ever be good enough. Instead, she had stood on the sidewalk and watched a taxi take them away, and the question the little girl had asked her, "Why didn't they let us sit?" kept turning over in her chest like a coin that would not stop spinning. She slept badly. She woke before her alarm. She put the napkin in the inside pocket of her work blazer because she could not think of anywhere else it belonged. The morning meeting was called at 7:45. That was the first warning. The staff briefing was never called before 8, and never on the floor of the empty ballroom, and never by Stuart Hale himself. Stuart was the operations director, a tall, soft-spoken man in his late 50s, who wore the same style of dark suit every day, and had a habit of folding his hands in front of him when he was about to deliver something he did not want to deliver. He stood now in front of 40-some employees, all of them in pressed uniforms, and his hands were folded. "The owner is coming in this morning," he said. "Unannounced visit. I was informed 40 minutes ago." A small ripple ran through the room. I would like everyone at their stations by 8:15. Lobby crew double-checked the floral arrangements. Restaurant the morning service should be at standard. Housekeeping every hallway, every elevator. He glanced at the back of the room, where Claire Bennett stood with her arms crossed neatly across her stomach. He has asked specifically to see the restaurant floor. Someone, a younger bellhop, asked the question no one else dared. "Who is the owner, sir? I don't think any of us have ever met him." Stuart looked at the floor for a moment, as if the answer required courtesy. "His name is Grant Callaway." There were a few seconds during which nothing happened. And then there were a few seconds during which everything happened at once, but only on the faces of 2 people in that room. The first was the head doorman, an older man named Anthony, who had worked the front door for 19 years, and whose memory for faces was the kind of memory that did not forget a man who had walked in yesterday carrying a child and a canvas bag. The second was Claire. Her face went through 5 expressions in under 2 seconds. Recognition, connection, understanding, a pure white-edged panic, and then settling over all of it, like a curtain, dropping at the end of a long act, something almost like resignation. The meeting broke. People scattered to their posts. Claire walked not quickly toward the staff bathroom on the lobby level. She locked the door. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at the woman in the glass for 3 minutes without moving. She reapplied her lipstick. She smoothed her hair. She straightened the collar of her blazer until it lay exactly flat. When she came out, her face was perfect again, and her hands were trembling just slightly, and she put them in her pockets. Ren was at the front desk when the revolving door turned at 9:15. He came in alone this time. The canvas bag was gone. In its place was a charcoal suit, cut in a way that did not announce itself, but that no one who had ever bought a suit could fail to recognize. A simple watch on his left wrist, polished black shoes, the same calm in his eyes that had been there yesterday, the same unhurried way of standing, the same quiet that seemed to take up more space than it should. But he was holding a small hand. Sadie wore a pink dress today, and her sneakers had different sparkles, and Mr. Bean's was tucked firmly under her right arm. She walked beside her father with the focused expression of a person who had been told that this was an important place and she was to behave very well. Her eyes found Ren behind the front desk almost immediately. She did not wave, but she did something more subtle. She lifted her chin a 1/4 of an inch, as if she remembered Ren and was glad to see her. Ren felt the napkin in her pocket like a small, warm weight. Anthony held the inner door open. Grant Calloway thanked him by name, which was the moment the rest of the lobby fully understood. Stewart was already crossing the floor, his hand extended, his composure intact. And Claire Bennett, standing in the doorway of the Aurelian room, did not move from her spot. She watched the owner of the building walk toward her, with his daughter's hand in his, and she waited. He did not walk to her first. He walked to the front desk. He bent slightly so that Sadie could see over the counter, and he asked Ren in a voice loud enough to carry, but not loud enough to perform, whether his daughter might wait there for a few minutes with someone he trusted. Ren said yes before she had finished registering what he had said. He nodded, once set Sadie on the tall stool behind the desk that the night clerks used, and told his daughter he would not be long. Sadie said, "Okay, Dad," and arranged Mr. Bean's carefully on the counter so that the rabbit could also see. Grant turned. He walked across the lobby toward the Aurelian room. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his pace. He stopped 2 yards from Claire Bennett, where every employee on the floor could hear, and where no one could pretend they had not. Yesterday, he said, "You asked my daughter and me to leave this restaurant. I would like to ask you one question, and I would like you to answer it honestly in front of the people who work here." Claire's hands were still in her pockets. She did not take them out. "Did you do that to us specifically?" Grant said. "Or do you do that to anyone who walks in here who doesn't look expensive enough to be allowed on?" She did not answer. She did not even try. The silence that came out of her was heavier than any confession she could have offered, and everyone in the lobby heard it. Grant looked away from her just for a moment, toward the rest of the staff, the bellhops and the front desk team, and the breakfast servers gathered at the edges of the room because they could not help themselves. When he spoke again, he was speaking to all of them. "My wife waited tables in a small place in Brooklyn before I met her," he said. "She walked through this lobby with me once 10 years ago in a sundress and flat sandals, and the man at the front door asked her very politely whether she had a reservation. She told that story for the rest of her life because it was one of the moments she felt most proud of this building. Not because of what it looks like, because of how that man spoke to her when he did not know who she was." The lobby was so quiet that the sound of a car horn from Fifth Avenue came through the glass like something underwater. "Anyone who walks through that door," Grant said, "in a suit or in a t-shirt by car or on foot with luggage or with nothing at all, is treated the same. That is not a policy. That is the reason this building exists. If you cannot do that, you cannot work here. It is that simple." He looked back at Claire. She had heard every word. He could see that. And he could see something else, something he had not expected to see, which was that she was not angry. She looked for a flicker of a second, like a person watching a thing she had been carrying for a very long time, finally fall to the floor. "I am not going to terminate you today," he said, and a small intake of breath moved through the staff behind him. "I'm going to move you off the restaurant floor. You will work in linen inventory until further notice. You will report to housekeeping management. You will not interact with guests in any capacity. I am giving you the same chance you did not give us yesterday, which is the chance to stand in a place you did not earn and decide what kind of person you want to be in it." She nodded once. It was not agreement. It was just acknowledgement. Grant turned to Stewart, who had been standing one step behind him through all of it. "Wren Mitchell at the front desk," he said. "I would like her brought into the full management training program starting this week. She will report directly to you." Stewart wrote it down without comment. Later, in the small office on the 36th floor, that had once been Lillian's favorite room in the building, because of the way the morning light came in, Stewart asked Grant the only question he had been holding back all morning. "You could have introduced yourself yesterday. 2 words. They would have moved heaven for you." "I know." "Then why didn't you?" Grant looked out the window at the city for a long moment before he answered. "Because I wanted to see what this place looks like when I am not in the room. You can't run a building from inside an office, Stewart. You have to know who your people are when they think no one important is watching. I would rather find out the hard way than not find out at all." He turned back from the window. "Now I know." The rest of that first week passed in a kind of quiet brightness. The Aurelian room got a new floor manager, a calm woman named Diane, who had been running the brunch shift for years. Wren was given a small desk in the operations office and a stack of binders thick enough to qualify as furniture. Stewart took her through them 1 hour at a time, and at the end of each session, he handed her something new, a vendor folder, a maintenance log, a guest complaint history, the kind of paperwork that runs a building the way arteries run a body. She read them all. She read them twice. She did not see Claire often after that. The linen inventory rooms were 3 floors below the lobby, behind a set of doors that most guests never knew existed. But once or twice, going down for a sample of new towel orders, Wren caught a glimpse of her sitting at a metal counter in a plain gray smock, ticking off items on a clipboard, with the same focused efficiency she had once used to seat couples at window tables. Their eyes met one of those times. Claire looked away first. What Wren did not see, because no one in the building saw it, was the conversation that took place in the small employee parking garage on the lower level 6 days after Grant's speech. Doug Reyes had worked the building's mechanical systems for 7 years. He knew which elevator shafts ran which lines. He knew the back end of the reservation software better than the people who designed it, because he was the one who had to keep it from crashing at 3 in the morning when the night auditor pushed the wrong button. His wife had been diagnosed with stage 2 cancer at Mount Sinai 18 months earlier. The hotel's insurance covered 70% of her treatment, and the remaining 30% had become a quiet, slow-moving thing that sat at their kitchen table every night while they tried to eat dinner. Claire found him at the end of his shift, leaning against the hood of his car, drinking the last cold inch of coffee from a paper cup. She did not ask him to do anything. She just talked. She talked about how strange it was the way the building had changed in a week. She talked about the kitchen rumor that the engineering team was going to be trimmed by 2 positions in the next quarter, which was not entirely a rumor, because she had overheard Stewart on a phone call. She talked about how the new girl, the one with 5 months of experience, was being given the kind of access that people like Doug, who had given the building 7 years, had never been offered. She mentioned, almost in passing, the number on the medical bill from last month, which she happened to know because she had once handled the staff hardship fund paperwork. She did not say what she wanted him to do. She let him connect the dots himself the way she had been connecting dots her entire career. 2 evenings later, he came to find her. The Sterling Boston dinner was on the books for the following Thursday. It was a closed corporate event. 55 guests, the kind of dinner that did not appear on any public calendar, because the deal it represented a 3-year hospitality contract worth $14 million was not yet public either. Wren had handled the reservation personally. She had confirmed the head count 3 separate times. She had reviewed the dietary file twice in one afternoon and flagged the entry for the company's chief financial officer, a woman named Margaret Hollins, who carried an epinephrine injector and whose peanut allergy was noted in capital letters on the booking sheet. Wren had walked the dining room twice that day, once in the morning and once 2 hours before the guests arrived, and she had personally checked each place setting against the seating chart. The appetizer was a delicate butternut squash soup with a swirl of pumpkin seed oil and crushed candied pecans on top. The CFO's place setting had been prepared with a different garnish, lightly toasted sunflower seeds, exactly as Wren had specified at the kitchen briefing that afternoon. The bowl that was placed in front of Margaret Hollins that evening had crushed peanuts in it. She saw it as the server set it down. She did not eat. She lifted her hand. The room went still in the slow, terrible way rooms go still when something has nearly happened and everyone realizes it at the same time. Wren was in the dining room within seconds. She apologized in a voice that did not shake even though her hands were cold. She had the dish removed. She had the kitchen called. In the kitchen behind the line, she found 2 ticket slips for table 14. One was the one she had reviewed that afternoon, marked clearly with the allergy note and the substitute garnish. The other was almost identical, dated the same evening, printed within the same hour, but missing the dietary line entirely. The 2 tickets had come off the same printer. No one in the kitchen could say which had reached the line first. Wren spent 45 minutes after the dinner ended, trying to track the second ticket through the system. It had been printed from the mechanical office terminal on the basement level, which had print access to the kitchen system, but was almost never used for that purpose. There was no signature, no timestamp on the user, only a printer log that confirmed the ticket existed. Margaret Hollins left the building that night politely, professionally, and without signing the contract. In the days that followed, small things began to happen around Wren that she could not quite name. A guest folio she had opened in the afternoon was missing 2 notes by the evening. Her shift on the staff schedule shifted twice in 1 week without an email. In the staff cafeteria, 2 of the older front desk clerks who had been friendly with her in the first weeks now ate at a different table and did not meet her eyes. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she was tired. She went to Stuart's office twice. The first time she stood at the door for 2 minutes and then turned around. The second time she went in and asked vague questions about kitchen ticket protocol, and Stuart answered them carefully and kindly. And she left without saying what she had really come to say. She was afraid of being seen as the new favorite who couldn't handle the pressure. She was afraid of being seen as the one who blamed other people when things went wrong. 3 floors below the lobby in the linen inventory room, Claire Bennett went home each night and poured a glass of wine, and then a second one, and she told herself that one more step would end it, that Wren would be quietly let go, that the building would settle back into a shape she recognized. She was not telling herself the truth, but she had stopped being able to hear the difference. 5 days after the Sterling Boston dinner on a Tuesday morning that smelled of rain coming in off the river, a woman on the 17th floor opened the small velvet pouch where she kept her jewelry and discovered that her diamond ring wasn't in it. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield. She was the wife of a state senator from Connecticut. She traveled with 2 pieces of luggage and 1 assistant, and she had stayed at the Callaway Grand 4 times a year for the last 6 years. The ring was a cushion-cut diamond on a platinum band, appraised at $11,000, and it had been given to her by her husband on their 20th wedding anniversary. She had taken it off the night before to wash her hands and placed it in the pouch on the bathroom counter. The pouch was still there. The ring was not. Within 2 hours, the situation was no longer about a piece of jewelry. Her assistant had called the senator's chief of staff. The chief of staff had called a number at the state attorney's office that did not appear in any public directory. By the time Stuart Hale was informed, the words formal inquiry had already been used twice in 2 separate phone calls, and someone in the building's legal department was drafting a statement. Wren had been the floor supervisor for the 17th floor that week. It was her name on the housekeeping rotation. It was her signature on the morning inspection log. It was her key card that had been used according to the access record to enter Mrs. Whitfield's room during the evening turndown service the night before. Stuart called Wren into his office at 11 o'clock that morning. She sat down across from him with her hands folded in her lap, the way a child sits when she has been asked to wait outside the principal's office, and she listened to him tell her, in the gentlest voice he had, that there was a problem on the 17th floor, and that she was the person whose name kept coming up. She told him she had not entered that room. She told him she had not even been on the floor after 6. He nodded. He asked her very carefully to please stay in the building today while the security team reviewed the footage. He told her this was procedure. He told her not to worry. She thanked him and walked out of his office, and as soon as the door closed behind her, she cried quietly in the hallway for the first time since she had started working there. The security review took place in the small office behind the front desk, where the monitors were stacked 3 high on a wall, and the camera feeds could be pulled from any point in the building, going back 90 days. The head of security, a former NYPD detective named Marcus Dolan, sat in front of the screens with Wren beside him, and he did not say anything as he pulled up the 17th floor hallway footage from the evening before. The figure that appeared on the screen at 9:46 was a woman in dark slacks and a dark cardigan. Her hair was pulled back. She walked down the hallway with the unhurried, slightly forward-leaning posture of someone who knew where every camera in the corridor was, and she kept her face angled just enough downward that the lens did not catch it. She stopped at the door of 1714. She used a key card. She went inside. She was in the room for 4 minutes. She came out and walked back the way she had come, head still angled down, hand still tucked close to her hip. But when she stepped sideways at the doorway to let the door close behind her, her right arm swung out just for 1 second. Just enough. Wren saw it before Marcus did. A thin gold chain around the right wrist. A small charm. A miniature key. She knew the bracelet. She had seen it for 5 months every day on the wrist of the woman who had once stood in the doorway of the Aurelian room and decided that a man with a canvas bag did not belong inside it. She had seen it that morning in the linen inventory room when she went down for towel samples, and her eyes had met Claire's across the metal counter. Wren did not say anything. She asked Marcus to rewind the footage and play it again. She watched it 3 more times. She wrote down the timestamp on a piece of paper. She thanked him and walked out of the office, and she did not go up to Stuart's floor. She went to the staff hallway behind the front desk and stood there for a long time with her hand against the wall, trying to decide what she was actually about to do. Tell Stuart. And she risked being seen as the new hire, who turned around and blamed a 9-year veteran the second things got hard for her. If she was wrong about the bracelet, if there were 10 of those bracelets in this city, she would be a young woman accusing an older woman of theft based on a 1-second blur of footage. She would be the girl who could not take the pressure of her promotion. She would be done. Stay quiet, and a woman she had known for 5 months would be fired or arrested for something she had not done, and a child who had drawn a yellow sun on a paper napkin would grow up in a world where the people who saw the truth had been too afraid to say it. She stood in that hallway for 8 minutes. She thought about the curb on 5th Avenue, and the small girl turning around, and her own mouth opening and closing and saying nothing. She walked up the stairs to the 36th floor. She knocked on Stuart Hale's door. The meeting was called for 3 o'clock that afternoon in the small conference room on the 36th floor that had once been Lillian Calloway's favorite room because of the way the morning light came in. By 3 o'clock, the light had already moved across the city and was striking the far wall in long, low slants. Grant sat at the head of the table. Stuart Hale sat to his right, his hands folded in front of him in the way he folded them when something difficult was about to be said. Marcus Dolan sat at the far end, with a thin folder squared up in front of him. Wren had been asked to sit 2 chairs back from the table against the wall, where she could see the room without being part of the line of sight. Claire was the last to arrive. She had been called up from linen inventory 10 minutes earlier, with no explanation. She came in still wearing the plain gray smock, her hair pulled back at the nape of her neck, her hands quietly folded across her stomach, the way she had stood through Grant's speech in the lobby almost 3 weeks before. She saw Wren first, then Marcus, then the folder. She sat down without being asked. Grant did not raise his voice. He opened the folder and slid 2 enlarged photographs across the polished wood, the kind of black and white still images that come off a security feed and lose most of their definition, but keep just enough. In the first image, a woman walked down the 17th floor hallway with her head bent slightly forward. In the second, the same woman stood at the door of 1714, her right arm extended sideways, at the exact moment the door swung closed behind her. Around the wrist, blurred but unmistakable, a thin gold chain. At the end of it, a small, bright point. A miniature key. "Claire," Grant said, "I would like you to show me your right wrist, please." She did not move for several seconds. Then she lifted her arm slowly and slid the sleeve of the smock up to the elbow. The bracelet sat against her skin where it had sat for 9 years. Her mother had given it to her the week she was hired at the Callaway Grand. The little key had been chosen on purpose, her mother had said at the time, because the key to a place like that was a hard thing to earn and a harder thing to keep. She looked at the bracelet on her own wrist for a long moment. Then she looked at Grant. Then she looked at Wren sitting against the wall with her hands folded carefully in her lap. Something in her gave way. "The kitchen ticket," she said. Her voice was quiet, level, almost informational, as though she were reading from a clipboard in linen inventory. "I asked Doug to print a second slip for table 14 the night of the Sterling Boston dinner. He used the basement terminal. I told him where to drop it on the line so it would reach the appetizer course before the corrected one." Stuart closed his eyes. "The ring," Claire said. "I let myself into Mrs. Whitfield's room during the turn-down round on Monday night. She was at dinner. I used a master keycard I had signed out under a housekeeper's name from the cleaning roster. The ring is in a velvet pouch in the bottom drawer of my locker. I was going to move it into Wren's locker on Friday afternoon. I had not done it yet." Marcus wrote something down without looking up. "Why?" Grant asked. There was no edge in the word. It was not even angry. It was a real question asked the way one might ask a real question of someone whose answer mattered. Claire looked at the photograph on the table, the one with her own wrist visible in the frame. "I came here at 25, she said. "I learned the name of every flower we put in the vases. I learned every wine on the list. I learned 3 different ways to fold a napkin and which one belonged on which kind of place setting. 6 months ago, Stuart sat across from me at this table and told me I would be the next director of guest services when the position opened. Last week, I read in the staff bulletin that they had hired someone from Cornell." Stuart did not look up. "No one called me," Claire said. "No one told me. I read it the same way the housekeepers read it." She looked at Grant directly for the first time. "And then one morning, a man walked in with a canvas bag, and I thought at least this one I get to decide. At least someone today is going to have to listen to what I say. I did not know who you were. But I will tell you the truth in this room. I am not sure it would have stopped me if I had." The room held very still. "That is not an excuse. I know that. I am not asking for one." Grant did not answer right away. He stood up from the table and walked to the window. The city was beginning the slow shift into late afternoon, the buildings across the avenue catching the last of the warm light against their upper floors. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked down at Fifth Avenue, where 11 floors below his daughter was sitting in a corner of the lobby with the new floor manager reading a picture book. When he turned back to the room, he had already decided. "Your employment with Callaway Holdings ends today," he said to Claire. "Marcus will walk you down to your locker. The ring stays with him. You will sign a separation agreement in legal before you leave the building, and you will not be permitted back on the property in any capacity. Stewart will handle the paperwork." Claire nodded. There was nothing left in her to argue with. Grant looked at Marcus. "I'm not pressing charges." Marcus did look up at that. "I want to make sure you heard me," Grant said. "No police, no filing. The ring is returned to Mrs. Whitfield by my office this evening. I will call her myself." Stewart finally raised his head. "Grant, I have a 6-year-old daughter sitting in the lobby of this building," Grant said quietly. "If I make that call to the precinct tonight, the next time she asks me what I did today, I am going to have to tell her I sent a woman to a cell. I want to teach my daughter that justice matters. I also want her to learn that destroying one more life does not put a life back together. Today, I am choosing the second lesson. I may be wrong, but it is mine to choose." He turned to Claire one more time. "You will not work in this industry in this city again. I will see to that quietly through people I know. But you will not carry a criminal record out of this room. That is the line, and that is where I am drawing it." She closed her eyes for a long second. When she opened them, her face was wet. She did not wipe it. "Thank you," she said. She smoothed the front of the gray smock and walked out of the room behind Marcus. At the door, she stopped and looked back. Not at Grant, not at Stewart, but at the room itself, at the way the late light fell across the long table. Her face for that one moment did not look like the face of a person who had just lost everything. It looked like the face of a person who had finally been allowed to put down something heavy that no one had ever told her she was allowed to put down. Then she was gone. Grant placed the call to Eleanor Whitfield from his office that evening. He apologized to her personally for what had happened in her room, returned the ring by private courier within the hour, and offered her the full balance of her stay as a gesture of accountability. She accepted with a graciousness that surprised him, and she did not raise her voice once. Doug Reyes was called into Stewart's office the following morning. Grant met him there. The conversation was short. Doug would leave Callaway Holdings the same day. There would be no criminal referral. And there was a private medical assistance fund the company maintained for staff hardship cases that would cover the remainder of his wife's treatment at Mount Sinai through the end of her care. Grant told him without warmth and without cruelty that he was not forgiving what Doug had done. He was choosing not to make a sick woman pay for it. Doug did not say anything. He set his keycard down on the desk and walked out. Wren was officially promoted to Assistant Director of Guest Services the following Monday. The office that had been held for the Cornell hire, who had never quite settled in, and who left the company within a month, became hers. The Callaway Grand did not change overnight. It changed the way a room changes when someone finally replaces a burned-out bulb. The staff smiled differently. The greetings at the door lasted half a second longer. Guests began to mention in their reviews that they could not quite name what was different about the place, only that something was. 3 weeks after Claire Bennett walked out of the Callaway Grand. For the last time, a black car pulled up at the front entrance on a Thursday afternoon, and Grant Callaway stepped out of it, holding his daughter's hand. Sadie was wearing a green dress today. Mr. Beans was firmly under her right arm as always. Her free hand was wrapped around 3 of her father's fingers, the way she always held him when she walked into somewhere new, even when the somewhere had begun to feel less new. The head doorman opened the door for her by name. The bellhops nodded as they passed. Sadie counted the chandeliers in the lobby on her way through, which was a thing she did, and she had got to 4 before they reached the entrance of the Aurelian room. The new floor manager seated them at the small round table in the corner by the window, the one that looked out over Fifth Avenue, and the long slant of late afternoon light moving across the buildings to the west. It was the table Sadie had wanted on the day of her mother's birthday. It was the table she had not been allowed to sit at. Wren came over to take their order herself. She was wearing a different blazer now, the kind with a small assistant director's pin on the lapel, and she looked at Sadie with the easy, warm steadiness of someone who had finally decided what kind of person she wanted to be in a room. She did not bring out a menu first. She set a small folded paper on the table in front of Sadie very carefully, as if it were something fragile. It was a paper napkin slightly creased from being carried in the inside pocket of a blazer for more than a month, with a wax crayon yellow sun on it, and rays like uneven eyelashes. Sadie's eyes went wide. She picked it up in both hands and looked at it. And then she looked up at Wren, and she smiled the way children smile when an adult has remembered something the child did not believe an adult would remember. Grant met Wren's eyes across the table. He did not say anything. He nodded once. When Wren walked away to put their order in, Sadie kept the napkin in her hands and held it flat against the front of her dress. "Daddy," she said, "the thing you whispered to me that day. The first day we came here. I still remember it. But why did you say it?" Grant looked at her for a long time before he answered. "Your mother used to tell me," he said, "that the truest measure of a person is how they treat someone who can give them nothing back. That day, when the lady asked us to leave, I wanted you to know something before you walked out that door. I did not want you to spend even 1 minute thinking that what she said to us had anything to do with what you are worth. I wanted you to know it before we ever stepped outside." Sadie thought about that for a moment. "So that is why you said it?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was deciding whether to accept an answer. "Don't be sad they wouldn't let us sit," she said almost to herself, repeating the words he had whispered to her at the door of the Aurelian room on the day of her mother's birthday. "We are worthy whether they know it or not." Grant did not answer. There was nothing to add. Outside the window, 38 stories of glass and steel rose above Fifth Avenue, and the building was still the building, and the city was still the city. But the small thing that made any of it worth anything at all was sitting in the corner with a yellow sun in her hands.